Hello, everybody. This is Ray Larison. I'm a member of the AnaJet Tech Support staff here at AnaJet, Inc. Thank you for attending today's webinar. We're going to cover understanding EKPrint Studio today. Okay, so first thing, a few things here before we get started. Make sure that your speakers are turned on so that you can hear, and if you don't have speakers, to plug in your headset. Also, keep all questions until the end of the presentation. We ask that you use the Q&A box on the bottom right-hand corner instead of the chat input area. Also, please keep all questions related to the topic being covered. At the end of the webinar, you'll be presented with a survey that we'd like you to fill out just to tell us how we did and future webinar ideas. Before we get started, a little introduction on what we're going to be covering today. We're going to be covering EKPrint Studio. This webinar is going to show you every option in EKPrint Studio and explain what each function does. We're also going to bring in some different graphics and tell you what ink settings to use and when to use them. Please keep in mind that any questions regarding EKPrint Studio can be answered by calling AnaJet Tech Support. This webinar is a bit lengthy. It was designed that way so that you can go back and print out the PowerPoint and all the content is still going to be there. So please don't feel the need to have to read every slide because I'm going to be verbally explaining everything. I'd also like to mention one last thing, that AnaJet is the only direct-to-garment printer that is dedicated to technical support and training, which is one of the reasons why we do these webinars once a month. Okay, EKPrint Studio. What is EKPrint Studio? EKPrint Studio is the RIP software that we use to send our graphics from the computer to the printer. In EKPrint Studio, you can control how much ink to use. You can adjust the quality and saturation of the image. You can enable white ink, and you can control how much white ink you use. You can adjust the lightness, brightness, and contrast of the image. You can also adjust the size and position of the image. And there's a lot of other options in EKPrint Studio that you can do. And that's the goal of this webinar, is to go into every setting that there is and explain what each function does. So the first thing we see when we open up the program is the File drop-down menu. And the first thing in here is Open. Obviously, you use this to open your graphic. EKPrint Studio can read TIFFs, PNGs, JPEGs, GIFs, bitmaps, and XIF files. You also want to make sure that when you bring a graphic into EKPrint Studio, it's in RGB mode. The next thing you have is Open Project and Save Project. What this does is it allows you to save a path to the image that you are printing and also the ink settings that you used for it. So say you print the same design once a month, or just a consistent design that you always are printing. And you have the design and you figured out the settings that work the best. And you want to save that. So you would click File, Save Project. So it's going to save a path back to the image. It's not going to save the actual image. It's just going to save a path. So if you change the location of your graphic on your computer and try to open up the project file, it won't open it because the path changed. So just make sure that when you're saving project files to keep your graphics in the same location on your computer. The next thing is Apply and Save Template. This is the same thing as opening and saving projects, except it doesn't save a path back to the image. It's only going to save the ink settings. So this is good for if you came up with a group of settings that work well with multiple different graphics, and you want to save those and apply them to various different graphics. You could save the template. And so you have these settings in EKPrint Studio. You go File, Save Template, and say you have a graphic, and you bring it into EKPrint Studio, and you say, I know the perfect settings for those. I have them saved. You can click File, Apply Template, navigate to that template file, and those ink settings will be applied to that graphic. The next thing you have is the Print button. This obviously sends the print job to the printer. Once you click File, Print, the data gets sent to the printer, and then you have to press Print again on the printer itself. There is a bit of redundancy in here that we'll cover later. There's a couple different ways to press Print. There's a couple different ways you can open an image, and those will also be covered a bit later. The next thing here, it's grayed out. It says Close, and this will close the graphic. It'll take the graphic out of EKPrint Studio. So if you have a design in EKPrint Studio and you don't want to print it, you want to print something else, you would click File, Close. It would get rid of the graphic, and then you could open up a new image. The next thing is Exit, and that closes EKPrint Studio. If you went File, Exit, the program turns off. Okay, so right next to File dropdown is the Configuration dropdown menu. And in here, you have ink setting, printer, and system. So if you click on ink settings, this window here pops up. And within this window are some more redundancies. You have ink drop size and ink level, which you can access in different areas of the program, and I'll show you that a bit later. So right now I just want to go over test pattern. What the test pattern does is you would select a drop size, either heavy, medium, and light. Also, by the way, medium is the default ink drop size for anything you print. You always start out at medium. So say you had medium selected, and then you click Test Print. Well, you would put your shirt onto the table, and you would print this test print right onto the garment, on a light color garment, because it's not going to print white ink. So what it does is it prints 5 different test patterns. And it's printing these 5 different test patterns with a medium drop size. The first test pattern is the ink level of 1. The second is the ink level of 2, 3, 4, and 5. So what it's used for is it's basically a test print that's showing you which ink level creates the best saturation with a medium drop size. And of course, you could change the drop size to heavy or light and do a test pattern again if you wanted to. But that's what's going on there. Okay, the next thing in here is adjustments. And within adjustments, you have lightness, brightness, and contrast. If you adjust the lightness, it's going to adjust the lightness, or you could increase the lightness or decrease the lightness. So what that's going to do is it's going to make the image lighter if you bring it up, and darker if you bring it down. And that is affecting the entire image as a whole. Brightness is something that I use on everything I print. Every graphic that I print from the AnaJet, I take the brightness to +32. The reason being is when you print a design onto a shirt, it tends to transfer darker. So by increasing the brightness all the way up to +32, it makes the image look closer to what you see in your monitor. The next one, contrast. This one works well if you have similar colors that when you print kind of blend in together. You can't really distinguish between the 2 colors. For example, you had a blue right next to a light blue. And when you printed it with the contrast at 0, it just kind of blended together. There's no really distinction between the 2. You could increase the contrast, and by increasing the contrast, it will separate those colors more. Okay, the next thing in here is channel setup. And this is referring to what ink cartridges you have on the side of the printer. There's 8 slots in the printer, and you have YMCK-WWWW as the default. So what that says is that what that means is that you have the color cartridges in the front 4, and then the white cartridges in the back 4. You would want this channel setup if you had YMCK in the front 4 and cleaning carts in the back 4 as well. There's a couple options in this dropdown. You have YMCK-YMCK, and what that is, that's telling the printer, or telling EKPrint Studio that you have all 8 cartridges are color ink. So you have YMCK in the front 4, and then YMCK in the back 4, yellow, magenta, cyan, and black. The other option that you have in here is XXXX-YMCK. And with that channel setup, it's telling the software that it's basically turning off the front 4 and then printing the colors from the back 4. So the channel setup depends on what cartridges you have in the printer. So if you're at YMCK-WWWW, that's most likely okay because that's the most common setup. The next thing here is bidirectional printing. And when this is checked and the printer is printing, the print head is moving from left to right, left to right, left to right. And on both passes, it's spraying ink. Well, if you unchecked bidirectional printing, it would print going from right to left, and then come back and not print, and then print from right to left, and then not print, and then print right to left. So what it does is it slows down the printing. The only reason you would want this not checked is if you were printing something very small, like a pocket logo that's maybe 3 inches wide. You want to uncheck bidirectional because it's going to slow down the print, and it's going to give you a clearer and crisper print. Okay, so we were just in the ink level tab. Once you click configuration ink settings, ink level tab is the first one that pops up, and that's the one we just went through. So next to it, you have utilities, print purge, and quality. So now we're going to talk about the utility tab. And the first thing in the utility tab is print head alignment. All the AnaJets that get shipped are aligned here at AnaJet before they ship. So you don't have to do a print head alignment if you just got your printer. The only time you would want to do a print head alignment is if you started printing and you were getting ghosting or a double print. Then you would want to do a print head alignment to fix that. And what happens is, it's kind of difficult to explain, but if you were to do it, you would understand. But what it does is it prints a series of red boxes, and it prints 3 groups of these red boxes. And what you're looking for is any lines or breaks in these boxes. And what you're looking for is the box that has the least amount of breaks, or the smallest line in it. And then you input that box number into the software and then click realign, and it will print another alignment. Basically, you're printing the best looking square and inputting that value for that square until you can do a print head alignment where the 5th box in all 3 sections is perfect with no lines in it. Printer port test. This is used to test to see if you are communicating with the printer from your computer. And it's a little tricky. What you would do is you would click printer port test, and at the same time be looking at the control panel on the printer. And if you click printer port test and the power light blinks on your printer, that means everything is communicating properly and you're good to go. If you click printer port test and the power light does not blink, then there is a communication error. There's something wrong. So you have to check what causes communication errors. You want to make sure that the AnaJet printer is set to the default printer and that it is selected for EKPrint Studio. You want to check your printer ports and also your USB cord. The next thing in here is print head nozzle check. And this is one of the most important functions of this program, is to print a nozzle check, because you have to print a nozzle check every day before you print. If you get a good nozzle check, then you're going to get good prints. If you get a bad nozzle check, you're going to have bad prints. So it's really important to get a good nozzle check before you print every day. But what it's doing when it prints a nozzle check is it's spraying ink out of every nozzle in the print head. And when it prints this, you print it onto a piece of paper, or you could print it directly onto the table if you have white ink in the printer. And it's going to print a checkered board box, and then beneath that, it's going to have 7 boxes that are made up of hairlines. And you're looking for any breaks in these lines or gaps in the checkered board. You're not looking for vibrancy or quality. You're looking for breaks. So if you have a lot of breaks in the lines, what you have to do is do a print head clean, which is the button right next to the nozzle check, until you can get a good nozzle check. So you did a nozzle check and it doesn't look that good, then you would do a print head clean. After the print head clean is done, you would do another nozzle check to see if the print head clean fixed it. If it didn't, you could do a second and even a third print head clean. But you never want to exceed 3 print head cleans in a row. If you do 3 print head cleans in a row and the nozzle check still doesn't look good, you want to wait about 15 minutes without using the printer to let it calm down a little bit. And then you do an ink charge from the AnaJet Sprint utility, which is a separate application. But what's going on when you do a print head clean is the print head is sliding over the maintenance station and creating an airtight seal. And it's pulling a little bit of ink through the print head, and then it's flipping the wiper blade up and squeegeeing the nozzle plate of the print head. And this clears up clogged nozzles. if you had a bad nozzle check. And that's why it's very important to do weekly maintenance also, because if the wiper blade is dirty, or the maintenance station, or around the nozzle plate, if those areas are dirty, instead of cleaning the nozzle plate, it could actually squeegee waste ink over the print head and give you an even worse nozzle check. So that's another key thing to the printers. Keep up on the weekly maintenance. Okay, the next thing in here is auto print head clean when idle. And in EKPrint Studio, it's very important that this is always set to disabled. The reason being is that we set this up on the control panel of the printer itself to every 8 or 12 hours. So if you had it set to every 8 or 12 hours on the printer, but then you had it set to every 16 hours in EKPrint Studio, that could send conflicting information to the printer, and the printer can get stuck in a print head clean, or you get an error on your control panel. Anytime data is conflicting, you could get errors on the printer. So it's very important that you always have this set to disabled. Okay, so that was the Utilities tab. The next tab here is Print Purge. And what the Print Purge does is it allows you to print from each channel individually. So say I just put a check mark in yellow, and that was it. And then I clicked on Purge Print. It's going to print a single bar of yellow, and that's it. So if you clicked on Select All, it would put a check mark in all 8 of these boxes. And then if you click Print Purge, it'll print a bar of color for each channel. The purpose of this is really, there's one purpose for it, and that's to test to make sure the printer got completely flushed with cleaning solution. If you know you're not going to be printing for 3 days or more, you have white ink in the system, and you know you're not going to be printing for 3 days or more, or it's been maybe 2 or 3 months since you flushed the system, and you have to flush the system with cleaning solution, you have to do a print purge on all 8 channels to make sure that the entire system got flushed with cleaning solution. So what you would do is completely flush the system with cleaning solution until all 8 lines are completely clear. And then you would turn the printer back on, go into the Print Purge tab here, select all, do a print purge on all 8 channels, and what you want to see is instead of 8 bars of color printing, you want 8 bars of cleaning solution to print. That's when you know that the printer got completely flushed. If you were flushing your system and you did this print purge and you saw ink come out, then you have to continue flushing the printer with the cleaning solution. Okay, so that was the Print Purge tab. The next one here is the Quality tab. And this is referring to how far the table jumps when it advances to the next section. So if you ever sat down and you watched the printer print, it prints in sections, and then the table jumps out and it prints the next section. So when these settings are set to speed, it prints a section, and then the table makes a big jump and prints the next section. The jump is big because it wants to finish the print job quick. Well, you could change that jump by adjusting this setting. So if you changed it from speed to superfine, that jump is cut in half. So the jump is much smaller. So what that does is that allows you to put more ink saturation onto your design. The only time you would change this is if you were printing, it basically is graphic dependent. If you're printing large areas of the same color, you would want to change the image to superfine. There's no real big difference between speed and fine, but there is a big difference between speed and superfine. So you can change the image from speed to superfine, but you would never want to change the white underbase from anything but speed. You always want this set to speed. If this was set to fine or superfine, at that point it's just too much white ink is printing, and you're basically wasting white ink. So you want to make sure that no matter what you're printing, the white underbase should always be at speed. Okay, back to the configuration drop-down menu. The next thing you have here is system, or I'm sorry, you have printer. And if you click configuration drop-down, click printer, then this window here pops up. And you want to make sure that the AnaJet Sprint printer driver is the selected printer. If it's not, if you have something else in there, like Adobe PDF or some other printer driver, and you try to print from EKPrint Studio, nothing's going to happen. So you have to make sure that the correct AnaJet driver is selected. Okay, so the next thing in the configuration drop-down menu is System. When you click System, this window pops up here, and there's a lot of options in here. The first thing you got is Measurement Unit, and this is referring to the grid in EKPrint Studio and the size of your image in EKPrint Studio. You could change that from inches to millimeters, and it's just personal preference. The next thing you have here is the grid. So you can control the grid. You could turn the grid off. You could turn it off by checking or unchecking Enable. You could also control how big the grid is by changing the width and the height of the boxes. And they also have this thing called Snap to Grid. And if you had your graphic in EKPrint Studio and you were clicking and dragging it to a specific spot in EKPrint Studio, and then you let go, it would snap to the nearest grid. So a lot of people like to have this not checked, because when it's not checked, you could place your graphic in a specific spot in EKPrint Studio, and it's going to stay there. It's not going to snap to the nearest grid point. The next thing we have in here is Axis Origin, and this is referring to your image position on the table. And I'm going to actually jump over to EKPrint Studio and show you this, because it's kind of hard to verbally explain it. Okay, so I got this basketball image in here. I'm actually going to shrink this down so you could see what I'm talking about here. All right, so right now in my configuration system menu, I have the axis origin set to left and top. And when that's selected, over here where it says image position, it's telling you left and top. So where it's at right now, it's 2.7 inches from the left edge of the table, and it's 4.3 inches from the top of the table. Also, as a rule of thumb, when I place images in EKPrint Studio and I'm printing it on the front of a shirt, I always click on center adjusted here to center the image, and then I always print it 1 inch from the top. And then when you load your shirt onto the table, it's going to print the design in the perfect location on the front of the shirt. So that's when it's set, when the axis origin is set left to top. You could change that if you want. I don't recommend it, but sometimes people like to have it set to center. And when it's set to center, it changes from left to top to horizontal and vertical. So say I put 1 inch in horizontal, it moved it 1 inch to the right of the center of the table. So naturally you could put -1, and then it's going to put it 1 inch to the left of the center of the table. Same rule applies with with vertical. See, because it's reading the distance the image is from the center of the table, rather than the left and right edge. So that's what axis origin is about. I'm going to jump back over to the PowerPoint here. The next thing in here is landscape mount. And if you want, you can change the table in EKPrint Studio from portrait to landscape. You wouldn't actually physically on the printer change the table from portrait to landscape. That always stays portrait. But in the software, you could change it to landscape if you wanted to. And then you could load the shirt sideways onto the table and print a wide design, like the last name of a person on the back of a shirt. And if you do that, you can adjust the landscape mount. So that all that is telling you is it's telling you which way to load the shirt. If you load it sideways from left to right or sideways from right to left. And you could distinguish between the two using landscape mount. The next thing in here is the pocket grid. And when that is enabled, it's going to give you an outline of where the pocket table would be on the actual printer, but in EKPrint Studio. So it's really useful, even if you're not using the pocket table. If you're just doing a pocket logo or a left chest logo onto like a regular tee and you don't need the pocket adapter, it's still good to have this enabled because it gives you a spot to put your pocket logo. So you would put your pocket logo into that area, and then you load the shirt on like normal and press print, and it's going to print in the perfect spot on the shirt. And you could change this from the left to right. Usually it's the right, because on logos on the front of a shirt, it's usually when you're wearing it on the left, but since you load the shirt in upside down, it's on the right. Okay, so the next thing in here is this button here called configuration. And this is something that you would never have to go into. You would never have to go in there and change anything. But I'm going to go in there and show you what everything is just so you know. But don't ever go in there and change anything because you would never have to. Okay, so if you clicked that configuration button, then this window would pop up. And you have all this information in here. The first thing you see is front and back. And that's talking about the front 4 slots in the printer and the back 4 slots in the printer. If you notice the letters, those are representing the colors. So this is telling us that the first slot in the printer is a cyan cartridge. A yellow cartridge. The second slot in the printer is a magenta cartridge. Third is cyan, fourth is black, and so on. You could, if you wanted to, change this. You could tell it, say, if you changed number 1 to cyan and number 3 to yellow, but that change didn't actually happen in the printer, and then you printed something, the print would come out all wrong because the machine thinks that the first channel has yellow in it, not cyan. So that's why you would never want to change this because it gets very confusing, and it's set from the factory, so you never have to go in here and change anything. There is this test pattern here that you can print, and that is basically making sure that each channel has the correct color, but you would never use it because you would never change this, so you don't have to worry about it. The last thing in this window is damper assignment, and this is kind of funny because if you have EK 3.3 or higher, you're going to see this area that I'm about to outline in yellow. You can see this area. And if you do have EKPrint Studio 3.3 or higher and you can see this area, then Rev B must be selected. You would never have it set to the original damper order. It would always be Sprint Rev B. If you don't have EKPrint Studio 3.3 or higher, then this area is not even in the program, so you don't even have to worry about it. Also, if you think that something changed in here and you're not sure how to get it back, you could always click on default down here on the bottom left, and it's going to take everything back to the default settings on how it was, or on how it should be. Okay, so moving on, we just went over the configuration dropdown. Now we have the help dropdown. The first thing in here is content, and all this is a link. So if you clicked on content, it would take you to Yukon Digital's website where they have frequently asked questions. They have the EK Studio user's manual, and then they have some other information about the driver as well. The next thing that you have in here is the MAC address. If you clicked on MAC address, a window would pop up, and it's going to tell you the MAC address of your computer. The reason that that's in there is because this is what Yukon Digital uses to verify and activate your program. It's based on your MAC address. So in some instances, you may need it. You might need it for product activation, which is the next thing here. Normally, when you activate the program, you click Help and then Product Activation, and you activate through the Internet, and then you're done. Well, if you don't have an Internet connection on your computer that has EKPrint Studio on it, what you have to do is find a computer that does have Internet, and then when you click Product Activation, there's another option where you could activate by installing a license file. So what you would have to do is copy your MAC address and then email Yukon Digital, and they'll email you back a license file that you can install. That's basically a scenario that doesn't really happen that much because you're probably going to have Internet on your computer, so you'll be able to activate the program normally. The next thing in here is About EKPrint Studio. And this, if you click on that, a window is going to pop up, and it's going to tell you which version of EKPrint Studio that you have, and that's it. Are you guys still with me? It's kind of a lengthy webinar, but we're getting through it. So hang in there, and if think of some questions that you may have about it, and at the end we'll definitely have some Q&A going on. So the next thing in here is the main area of EKPrint Studio, and the first thing that you have is table size. And you have 3 different table sizes. You have standard, youth, and long. The standard is 12.5 by 16, youth is 8.5 by 12, and then the long is 8.5 by 16. You're going to be using the standard table for probably 90% of everything you do. Unless you specialize in printing baby clothes or onesies, then you would use the youth table, the smaller table. And then you have the long table, and that's good for printing on sleeves or ribbed tank tops. But if you click this drop-down menu to change your table size, you'll notice that there's a standard table size with a P and then a standard table size with an L. And that's what we were talking about earlier. You could change it from portrait to landscape if you're planning on printing a very wide design. Okay, the next thing we have in here is ink drop size. And this is referring to the physical size of the droplet of ink that the printer is spraying. So it has a light drop size, which is 8 picoliters, medium, and heavy. And again, the medium drop size is your default drop size. That's where you always want to start out at. The next thing you have in here is ink level. And what this is referring to is how many passes the printhead makes before it advances to the next section in the design. So if you had ink level of 3 selected, it's going to print 3 passes, and then the table is going to jump, and it's going to print the next section with 3 passes, and the table is going to jump, and so forth. So it's all about saturation with these settings. The ink level and drop size affect the amount of ink being printed. Okay, the next thing we have in here is color mode. And under color mode, you have these options here. You have standard, vivid, neutral, photo, and black and white. Standard is the color mode that you most commonly be using. Probably more than 90% of everything you print is on standard. And what that does is it's going to give you a print that is most true to your colors. It's not going to alter your colors. Vivid, however, will, because Vivid by default will oversaturate to give you bright, vibrant prints. So it's going to give you that bright and vibrant print, but it's also going to alter the color a little bit to achieve that. So you have to keep that in mind. The next thing you have is neutral and photo. And these are similar in the way the printhead sprays the ink when this is selected. When all the other color modes are selected, the printer is spraying the ink out in an offset pattern for fill purposes. Well, with neutral and photo, it's spraying ink in a very organized pattern. So you could look at it as it's spraying a droplet of ink on top of a droplet of ink on top of a droplet of ink. And what that's used for is mainly photographs. So you would want to use neutral for any photographs that didn't have people in it where you can distinguish skin tone. So like photographs of a building or a car or a landscape, you would want to use the neutral mode. If it was a picture of a person where you could see skin tone, that's when you want to use the photo mode because it's great for distinguishing skin tone. The last one in here is the black and white mode. And what this is going to do is it's going to take your full color design and print it in grayscale. Another thing it does is it pulls ink from just the black ink cartridge. All the other color modes mix ink to give you a black, to give you a rich black, except black and white mode. That's going to pull from only the black ink cartridge. So it works really good, especially if you have, say, a design that is just black text on a white shirt. That's when you would want to use black and white mode. Okay, the next thing in here is copies. And copies is just that. If you put 5 copies in here, it's going to send 5 copies of the design to the printer. What I always tell people is to never go over 10 copies at a time because if every time you put an extra copy in, it's making the file size bigger and bigger and bigger, and it takes longer for the computer to process that information and send it to the printer. So you always want to keep the copies under 10 so that everything flows smoothly and it's not lagging or anything. Okay, so the next section here is image settings. And in image settings, you can adjust the scale, the width, the height, and you can also rotate. The first thing is scale, and you could scale by percentage. So if you wanted to make it 50% smaller, you can do that, or you could make it 150% there and make it bigger. What I like is the width and height, because you can make the design a specific width or height. So you could put 10 in for the height, and it's going to proportionally make the image bigger until it's exactly 10 inches high. You also have this rotation tool, and you could rotate it 90 clockwise or 90 counterclockwise. It's kind of a weird feature because you can't keep hitting 90 degrees clockwise until it makes a complete circle and is back to where it was. If you did rotate the image and you want it back the way it was, you have to have it to none. Also, I put this caution down here at the bottom because we get this tech support call a lot where you open up an image and it doesn't open it, or you get an error and the program crashes. The reason that happens is because you're bringing in an image that is bigger than the print table. So it's bigger than 12.5 by 16. Either the image is bigger than 12.5 by 16, or the canvas size is bigger than 12.5 by 16. If that happens, EKPrint Studio won't be able to open it. So if you ever get that error, and sometimes it's called scaling error, then that's why. You want to make sure that the image is smaller than the size of the table. Okay, this is talking about what we already talked about, and that's the image position, left to top, and that's dependent on the axis origin. So if it's set to left and top, you can adjust this, and it's telling us it's 0.85 inches from the left and 3.10 inches from the top. Remember, if this is set to centered, this changes from horizontal and vertical. They also have the center adjusted option here, where you place a check mark in there, and it's automatically going to center your image back to the middle of the table. Another neat feature in EKPrint Studio is the textile color. This has no bearing on your print. It's not going to affect your print in any way. It's just used as a reference. And all it does is it changes the background color in EKPrint Studio. So when you bring in an image like normal, the background color is white. Well, you could change this to say you were printing on a light green shirt. You could change this to green, and you could kind of get an idea of what it might look like on that shirt. But it's completely optional, and it doesn't affect your print. Okay, so these are the options at the very bottom of EKPrint Studio, and this is where it gets a little redundant because we already went over these options. This help button here is the same help button that links you back to Yukon Digital's website. The open button, it will open an image just like clicking File Open, or you could also drag and drop an image into EKPrint Studio. The print button, that sends the information to the printer so that you could print it. Ink settings, that will pop up a dialog box where we had the ink settings, the utilities tab, print purge tab. You could also access that by configuration drop-down menu and then ink settings. And then exit closes EKPrint Studio. All right, so let's talk about white ink. So the printer is not going to just automatically print white ink. If you had white in the design that you wanted to print and you did not enable the white ink to print, the printer is simply not going to print the white. It's just going to not print anything. So when it comes out, those areas of the design are going to be the color of the shirt. So in order to print white, we must first enable the white and put a check mark here. And then you could click Settings and go into all the white ink settings. How I like to look at it is the main area of EKPrint Studio, where you could see the table and your graphic in there. Those settings are all about the color ink. Once you click Enabled here and go into Settings here for the white underbase, that controls all the white ink. And once you hit Settings, you get this dialog box here. And you see some similar things here. You have the drop size and the level. That's the same exact thing as the color settings that we already talked about. The drop size is light, medium, and heavy. It's talking about the physical size of the droplet of ink. You have the level, same thing. It's talking about how many passes the printer makes before it jumps to the next section. And the most important thing for the white ink underbase setting is content-based. Everything depends on whether or not this is checked. If content-based is checked, it's going to print a gradient underbase to save you on white ink usage. So what it does is, if content-based is checked, you get the gradient underbase. So if it's unchecked, it's going to print a solid white underbase. So checked, it's a gradient underbase. Unchecked, solid white underbase. Okay, so the next thing you have here is this color contrast, and you have this slider bar. If content-based is checked, then this slider is more ink and less ink. So you say you had content-based checked and you printed a gradient white underbase, and you liked it, you thought it looked good, but you want more white, you could slide this to the left and give it more white. Or you could slide it to the right and print less white. If this was slid all the way to the left, to the more white ink area, then all the way to the left, it's going to give you a solid white underbase. When this gets complicated is when content-based is not checked. When content-based is not checked, this turns into a transparency thing, this slider. So the only time you would have, there's really only one instance where you would have content-based not checked and then adjust the slider. And that's if you have a white gradient. If you had a design that started white and then it just faded out into the color of the shirt, that's when you would have content-based unchecked, and you would have to adjust this contrast slider and bring it into the positive, around plus 15 or plus 20 or so. And I'm going to bring in a design at the end and show you an example of when to use this. So the next thing here is you have this Restore Defaults button. And this, if you click on this, it's going to restore the defaults, but only in this window for the white base ink control. If you have something else selected out here, like highlight level control, and you click Restore Default, it's not going to change those. It's just going to restore what's in here back to default. So the next thing we have here is the highlight level control. And this is used to print white a second time during the color pass. Its primary function is when you're printing a design that there's white in the design, but it does not require a white underbase. So if you had this highlight level control slider all the way to 100, all the way to the right, and then you had the level set to 0, it's going to print the design in one pass. It's going to print the color in the design, and it's going to print the white in the design in one pass. And I'm going to show you an example of this a bit later also. The next thing in here is white mixer. And this is something that people don't really use. All it does is it mixes white ink in with the color ink to give you pastels. And people don't use it because you could achieve those kind of colors without mixing white ink. So white ink mixer is not really used that often, but the underbase choke is definitely something that is used a lot. And what it is it's the equivalent of a trap that screen printers use. When you print white onto a shirt, the white ink expands and it gets bigger, just a little bit. So if you were to print the white underbase the exact same size as your color pass, white ink would poke out of the edge. The choke fixes that. So this level of 10 is referring to 10 pixels. And what it's going to do is it's going to print the underbase 10 pixels smaller than the color pass so that you don't get that white edge. You do change this. If you were printing very fine lines or small text, you would lower the choke to 1. Because if you have a very small line or very small text, 10 pixels could totally get rid of the fine line or small text. So you want it, instead of to only take 10 pixels off of it, you want it to take 1 pixel off, so that the underbase is only 1 pixel smaller than the color path. And again, that's only if you're printing fine lines or small text. You lower that value. The next thing you have in here is the bidirectional print. It's the same bidirectional print as the color settings. Same rules apply. If you are printing a small logo that required a white underbase, you would want that unchecked to slow it down, and it would give you a nice, crisp print. Image background, last thing in the underbase settings. This is important because when you print with the white ink, the image must have a transparent background. If it's inside of a box, like if it's inside of a white box, then it's going to print the white box, and you don't want that. So you have to make sure that before you bring in an image into EKPrint Studio that you remove the background beforehand. So in Photoshop, for example, do it in Photoshop first, and then bring it into EKPrint Studio. But what this area in the program was built for is to remove the background for you. It doesn't really work that great. So what happens is you bring in an image into EKPrint Studio and say it had a white background. EKPrint Studio knows that it's on a background. So instead of having transparency selected, it would automatically select opaque. And then you could select, and then if that happened, you can uncheck opaque and select color, and then choose the color of the background from this drop-down menu, or enter its RGB value here. And it's going to remove that color from the background, but it's also going to remove the color from the entire design. So if there was white in the design, it's going to remove the white background, and it's also going to remove the white in the design. That's why it's always best to remove the background in Photoshop or CorelDRAW or whatever you use beforehand, and then bring it into EKPrint Studio. The ideal situation is that this is already done, so that when you bring in your design into EKPrint Studio already knows it's on a transparency background, and that will be selected. Okay, so let's jump into some samples here. I chose the pirate design. I'm sure everybody is familiar with it. I'm labeling this as a standard graphic because it is pretty much your standard graphic. And for a standard graphic being printed on a dark shirt, these are the settings you would use. A medium drop size, ink level at 2, color mode at vivid, and brightness at +32. That's my thing. I always bring the brightness to +32 because every print looks better with the brightness up. And the default that I put on this one for the white ink is the default white ink underbase settings, but all I did was uncheck content-based. So by unchecking content-based, it's going to print a solid white underbase, and then it's going to print the vivid color over it, and then the color is just going to pop, and it's going to look brilliant. If you have this design set up to be printed on a light-colored shirt with no white ink, you would use these settings. These are your default settings for printing a standard graphic on a light-colored shirt. Medium 3 vivid, brightness at +32. Notice how the level is 3 here and 2 here. When you print a design directly onto the fibers of a shirt with no white underbase, you need more ink. That's why the level's at 3, because the ink is getting absorbed into the shirt. So you need more ink for that. When you're printing on top of a white underbase, that absorption is not happening. So you lower the level to 2. If you ever experience bleeding, it's because either the white ink was too wet when color was printed over it, or the color settings were too high for the white ink, and then it's going to bleed. Also, I made a note down here. Using Vivid is optional. It will alter your image a little bit, but it's going to give you brighter colors. Okay, so here's a layout of your standard graphic settings. I have a medium 2 vivid selected here, I have it 1 inch from the top, which is the optimal spot for your shirt. I have the white ink enabled. I have the brightness at plus 32. And then in the white ink underbase settings, it's all default settings, except all I did was uncheck content-based. And this is also optional. You don't have to uncheck content-based. Unchecking content-based is going to print more white. It's going to cost you more to print it, but it's going to look really good. You can print this design with content-based checked, and it's still going to look good. But if you want it to pop and be really bright, you can uncheck it and print a solid white. Okay, here's another design, a solid color design. So we're printing a large area of the same color. And when I see graphics like that, I always use this group of settings. In fact, I use this group of settings for a lot of prints that I do because it works on a lot of stuff. And that is ink drop size light, level at 2, color mode standard, brightness at plus 32, and the quality at superfine. And then for the white ink underbase, I did the same thing as the Pirate. I just did the default settings, and all I did was uncheck content-based for a solid white. And again, that's optional. You're going to be using a lot more white if you uncheck content-based. Okay, so here's it laid out. Light 2 standard here. I got it 1 inch from the top. I got the white ink enabled there. Brightness is at plus 32 again. And here's the thing that makes it all work is the quality mode. I have it set the image to superfine. Again, you always want the white underbase at speed, but in this one, I changed the image to superfine. That's because it's a large area of the same color, and you want it to fill real nice. That's what's going to make it come out good, superfine. And here's the underbase, default settings, content-based, not checked. Okay, so here's an example of what I was trying to talk about earlier where there's white in the design, there's white in the soccer ball here, but it doesn't require a white underbase because it's going on a baby blue shirt. So what you do is you use these settings here. These are the standard color settings for printing color onto a light colored shirt. Medium 3 standard, brightness plus 32. What makes this work is the white underbase. Actually, I should say the white ink settings because we're not printing an underbase. So the white underbase settings is ink level 0 with the highlight level control at 100. So here's the breakdown on this one. Medium 3 standard, 1 inch from the top. White ink is enabled again. Brightness is always at plus 32. And here's what makes it all work. I took the ink level in the white underbase to 0. That turned off the white underbase. And then I turned the highlight level control to 100. That's enabling it to print white while printing the colors and not printing an underbase. So basically what's going to happen is it's going to print the whole design in one pass. It's going to print the color in the design. It's going to print the white in the design. And it's not going to print an underbase. Okay, so the last one we have here is the basketball image. And this is where I wanted to talk to you about the gradient white underbase. If you notice the edges of this, the blue explosion, there's white that is being gradiented out to nothing. So there's specific settings for that to achieve that. The color settings, I'm using medium to vivid with the brightness at plus 32. Those are basically the Pirate settings. The white underbase, however, is different. It's medium 3 with the content base not checked, and the contrast is at -15. That's what's going to give the white underbase a feather edge. It's going to give it a feathered edge. So here's a breakdown of the color. Medium to vivid, same as before. Almost 1 inch from the top. I think that image was kind of big, so we couldn't get it exactly 1 inch from the top. White ink is enabled. Brightness, again, is at plus 32. And here's where the white ink works. Okay, so we have medium 3, content base is not checked, and the contrast is at plus 15. That's what's giving us our feathered edge. And I'm going to hop over to EKPrint Studio and show this real fast. Okay, so here's the basketball design. And I have the white ink enabled. And I have content-based not checked. And I have the contrast at +15. So when you preview this, and you can click preview to preview your white ink. See, the edges now are feathered, just how the design is. If you went in here and this was over all the way to the left, then it's going to be a solid white outline of the image. So you want to make sure that if in that instance, and there doesn't happen that often, but if you do have white that gradients out to nothing, you want to increase this value to +15 or to +20. That's like a little buffer zone there. You could bring it between 15 and 20. All right, I'm going to hop back over to the PowerPoint here. Okay, that was basically it. I'm going to open it up for some Q&A. I actually see some questions in here already that I'll address. And if you guys have any other questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A section at the bottom right corner. Okay, Alex and Joanne asked if you have content-based unchecked with the regular white default settings. The white default settings are medium 3 with content-based checked. So by default, content-based is checked because it's checked because it wants you. They want you to save on ink usage. You don't have to use a solid white. You could use content-based and still get good prints. But if you go in there and you uncheck it, just know that you're going to get a solid white, but you're going to use a lot more in ink. Also, Denise asked, what settings do you recommend for 50-50 blend? 50-50 blend is the highest blend that you could print on with the AnaBright ink. A better way to think of it is that for the AnaBright ink, it has to have at least 50% cotton in it. If your garment does not have at least 50% cotton in it, then your print is not going to work. Also, printing on 50-50s, they don't give you as good of a quality print like printing on 100% cotton does. You can still print on a 50-50, and you would use the same settings that you would on a 100% cotton shirt, same settings and everything, but the ink is only adhering to the 50% cotton portion of the shirt, so you could lose some of its vibrancy that way. Denise asked if you can get the basketball image. I'd have to check on that. I'm not sure if it's a copyrighted image that we bought for sample printing or what it is, but I could look into that and get back to you on that. Oh, I just got notified by Paul Green, one of our applications manager. The basketball is available at Great Dane, his website. I believe it's greatdanegraphics.com. You could get the basketball there. Okay, Alex and Joanne, you asked another good question. If you have a solid white text on a black shirt and content-based is unchecked, would it be default everywhere else on the white settings? Yes, it would be. So if you ever print, actually, I take that back. Yes, it will be, but there's one change. If you're printing just white text onto a black shirt, you would uncheck content-based, and then you would take the choke to 1 because you don't want it to be smaller. You don't want it to be 10 pixels smaller than what it really is. So yeah, it is the same settings you would use. Content-based would be unchecked, but you would want to take that choke down to 1. Okay, it looks like you guys all got it. I would like to thank everybody for attending this webinar. You can please fill out this survey that you'll be presented with. Just let us know how we did. We always like to get feedback on future webinars, so if we get a high demand for something that everybody wants to talk about, we'll definitely create a webinar and do it again. So thanks again, everybody, for attending the webinar, and we'll see you next month.